There's something deeply unsettling about watching someone hurt others and genuinely believe they're the hero of the story. Something that makes you question reality itself when the person who betrayed you, manipulated you, or caused you real harm looks you in the eye and sees themselves as the victim, as the good guy, as the one who was wronged. You've seen it, maybe you've lived at that moment when someone does something genuinely terrible, and somehow, impossibly, they've convinced themselves it was justified, necessary, even noble. And you're left standing there wondering if you're losing your mind, because how can they not see what they've done? How can they sleep at night? How can they look in the mirror and not recognize the damage they've caused? Here's the truth that nobody wants to hear, but that psychology has proven again and again bad people almost never think they're bad. And understanding why that happens might be one of the most important things you ever learn about human nature. I'm Sergiu Popovici, and this is Psychology by Sergiu Popovici. Let me start with something that sounds like it should be obvious, but actually isn't. Almost no one wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror, and thinks I'm a bad person, and I'm okay with that, because the human mind simply doesn't work that way. We're not built to see ourselves as villains even when we're doing villainous things. There's a quote from the film The Talented Mr. Ripley that captures this perfectly. Whatever you do, however terrible, however hurtful, you never meet anybody that thinks they're a bad person. And while that might sound like an exaggeration, psychological research suggests it's frighteningly close to the truth. Think about every conflict you've ever witnessed or been part of, every war, every divorce, every workplace drama, every family feud. Both sides almost always believe they're the good guys. Both sides have constructed a narrative where their actions are justified and the other side is wrong, unreasonable, or even evil. Psychologist Carolyn Kaufman pointed out that in World War II, American propaganda showed swastika-bearing boots crushing churches, while Nazi propaganda portrayed Hitler as a Christ-like figure vanquishing evil dragons, each side convinced of their own righteousness, each side painting the other as the villain. This isn't just about major historical events, this is about the person who cheated on you and convinced themselves you drove them to it. The boss who bullied you and believes they were just being a strong leader. The friend who betrayed you and sees themselves as the victim of your overreaction. So what's actually happening in the brain when people do terrible things and somehow avoid feeling like terrible people? And the answer involves some of the most fascinating and disturbing mechanisms in human psychology. The first and perhaps most powerful mechanism is something psychologists call moral justification, which is the process of redefining your behavior so that it seems not just acceptable, but actually heroic, transforming what looks like cruelty into what feels like courage, what appears to be selfishness into what seems like self-preservation. Psychologist Albert Bonder has studied this extensively and found that people can commit acts they would normally find reprehensible by first convincing themselves that those acts serve a higher purpose. You're not being cruel, you're being tough, you're not manipulating, you're strategizing. You're not hurting someone, you're teaching them a lesson they need to learn. This is how people justify behavior that would otherwise violate their own moral standards. They change the framework, they rewrite the story, they adjust the lens until what they're doing doesn't look bad anymore, but looks necessary, justified, even righteous. The second mechanism is projection, which is one of the most insidious defense mechanisms the human mind has ever invented, where people take their own undesirable qualities and attribute them to OT. Hers instead of acknowledging them in themselves. If I'm being dishonest, I become hypervigilant about other people's dishonesty, and I might even accuse innocent people of lying because seeing that flaw in others protects me from seeing it in myself. This is why cheaters are often paranoid about being cheated on, why liars don't trust anyone, why manipulative people are convinced everyone is trying to manipulate them. Research on narcissistic personality patterns shows that people with these traits will routinely attribute their own negative characteristics to others, while claiming other people's positive qualities as their own if someone else is kind. The narcissist will say, no, that person isn't really kind. I'm the kind one. If someone else is successful, they'll say that person is a fake, but I'm authentic. The third mechanism is what psychologists call cognitive dissonance reduction, and it's so automatic that most people don't even realize they're doing it. When your behavior contradicts your self-image, your brain experiences psychological discomfort. And to resolve that discomfort, you don't change your behavior. You change your perception of the behavior instead. If you think of yourself as a good person, but you do something that hurts someone, your brain has three options: admit you did something bad and feel the full weight of that guilt, change your behavior going forward, or convince yourself that what you did wasn't actually bad. And unfortunately, The third option is by far the most common because it's the easiest and least painful. This is why people who harm others can maintain positive self-images. They're not lying to you about feeling like good people. They've actually succeeded in lying to themselves so effectively that they genuinely believe it. They've rewritten their own story until the uncomfortable parts disappear. Research on narcissism specifically shows something even more disturbing. People with narcissistic traits don't just fail to see themselves as bad. They actively construct elaborate fantasy worlds where they're exceptional, admired, and morally superior, and they defend these fantasies with shocking intensity. Clinical psychologist Stephen Diamond explains that narcissists live in a reality propped up by distortion, self-deception, and magical thinking, spinning self-glorifying fantasies that protect them from feelings of inner emptiness and shame, and anything that threatens to burst that fantasy bubble is met with extreme defensiveness or rage. Here's what makes this so dangerous. Narcissists don't recognize that they lack empathy. They believe they're actually more empathetic than others. They don't see their manipulation. They see strategic thinking. They don't acknowledge their cruelty. They frame it as necessary toughness or justified response to provocation. Studies have found that narcissists will even perform moral behaviors, not because they care about morality, but because it gives them an opportunity to be admired, to be seen as superior, to demonstrate that they're better than others. Their apparent kindness is actually a form of self-promotion disguised as virtue. And perhaps most disturbingly, when narcissists fail or face criticism, they don't attribute it to their own shortcomings. They blame the incompetence of their evaluators, the inadequacy of their collaborators, or the unfairness of the situation. It's never their fault. The world is simply failing to recognize their brilliance. The fourth mechanism is selective attention and memory, where people unconsciously focus on information that supports their preferred self-image, while ignoring or minimizing information that contradicts it. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, and it operates automatically, filtering your perception of reality to protect your ego. If you've hurt someone, but you think of yourself as kind, your brain will emphasize all the times you were kind and minimize or rationalize the times you were cruel. You'll remember your good intentions and forget your harmful impacts. You'll focus on what was done to you and overlook what you did to others. This creates what psychologists call an internal PR department that constantly spins your story to your advantage, editing out the uncomfortable parts, highlighting your virtues, explaining away your vices, and constructing a version of reality where you always come out looking good. Research shows that this isn't conscious manipulation. In most cases, people aren't aware they're doing it. They genuinely believe the edited version of events their brain presents to them, which means they can pass a lie detector test about their own goodness because they've successfully deceived themselves first. The fifth mechanism involves something even more fundamental: the distinction between intentions and impacts, where people judge themselves by their intentions while judging others by their impacts, creating a massive empathy gap. When you do something that hurts someone, you know you didn't mean to cause harm. You know the circumstances that led to your behavior. You know your internal struggles and constraints. So you judge yourself leniently based on those good intentions, even if the impact was terrible. But when someone else does something that hurts you, you don't have access to their intentions, their circumstances, their internal experience. You only see the impact on you. So you judge them harshly based on that impact regardless of what they might have intended. This asymmetry is built into human perception, and it means that genuinely harmful people can look at the damage they've caused and think, but I didn't mean it that way, or I had good reasons, while their victims look at the same situation and think, how could they do that to me? What makes all of this even more complicated is that some people, particularly those with psychopathic traits, actually lack the normal emotional responses that would make them feel guilt or empathy. In the first place, they're not suppressing guilt or rationalizing it away. They genuinely don't feel it. Research suggests that roughly 1% of the population has psychopathic traits, meaning they can hurt others without experiencing the emotional discomfort that would normally prevent such behavior. They can be charming, successful, functional members of society while completely lacking the internal moral compass that guides most people's behavior. For these individuals, it's not that they think they're good despite doing bad things. It's that they don't experience their actions through a moral lens. That all morality is just a set of rules other people follow, a game to be played, a mask to wear when convenient. But here's what you need to understand: most people who do harmful things aren't psychopaths. They're ordinary people using these psychological mechanisms to protect their self-image. And that might actually be more frightening because it means any of us could potentially cause harm while maintaining the belief that we're good people. This raises an uncomfortable question if bad people don't think they're bad. If harmful behavior can be so easily justified and rationalized, how do you know that you're not doing the same thing? How do you know your own self-assessment is accurate and not just another example of these same psychological mechanisms at work? The answer requires a level of self-honesty that most people find extremely difficult and painful. You have to actively seek out information that contradicts your self-image. You have to listen when people tell you that you've hurt them even when your intentions were good. You have to examine your rationalizations and ask whether they're genuine reasons or convenient excuses. Psychologist Carl Jung argued that everyone has a shadow self, the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge, the impulses and qualities we deny or project onto others, and he believed that psychological health requires integrating that shadow, acknowledging our capacity for harm, recognizing our flaws and failures rather than defending against them. This is terrifying because it means accepting that you're not always the hero of your own story, that sometimes you're the villain in someone else's story, that your good intentions don't erase your harmful impacts, that being a good person isn't a permanent state, but an ongoing practice that requires constant vigilance and self-examination. The reason bad people never think they're bad is because the human mind is exquisitely designed to protect the ego from threats, and nothing threatens the ego more than acknowledging that you've caused unjustified harm to others, so the mind deploys every defense mechanism available to avoid that acknowledgement. What this means practically is that you cannot rely on someone's self-assessment to determine whether they're harmful. People who genuinely damage others will often be the most convinced of their own righteousness, will have the most elaborate justifications, will seem the most certain that they're the victims rather than the perpetrators. Instead, you have to look at patterns of behavior and their actual impacts on others. You have to notice when someone consistently leaves damage in their wake, regardless of their stated intentions. You have to recognize that "I didn't mean to" stops being a valid excuse when the same harmful patterns repeat again and again. And for yourself, you have to cultivate what psychologists call epistemic humility, the recognition that your perception of yourself might be wrong, that your justifications might be rationalizations, that the people you've hurt might have legitimate grievances even if your intentions were good. This doesn't mean becoming paralyzed with guilt or assuming you're a bad person. It means staying open to feedback, being willing to acknowledge mistakes without defensive reactions, examining your behavior honestly rather than automatically defending it, and taking responsibility for impacts even when you didn't intend them. The uncomfortable truth is that the line between good people and bad people isn't as clear as we'd like to think, that most people exist in a gray area where they do both helpful and harmful things. And what separates psychologically healthy people from harmful ones is often just the willingness to acknowledge their mistakes and actually work to change, rather than endlessly justifying and repeating them. If you found this exploration into the psychology of self-deception valuable, subscribe to Psychology by Sergiu Popovici and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future videos on the hidden mechanisms that shape human behavior. Leave a comment below about a time you realized you'd been rationalizing behavior that was actually harmful, or share your experience dealing with someone who seemed completely unable to acknowledge the damage they caused. These discussions help all of us develop the self-awareness and psychological insight we need to avoid falling into the same traps. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.